Hello, everybody. Sorry about that false start. If you were there on that false start, I was trying to connect from my personal account, but since I'm an admin with my theater company, Cara Mía Theater, it only allows me to connect on Cara Mía right now. So here we are. My name is David Lozano, and I am the executive artistic director of Cara Mía Theater, and I'm happy to be here with the general manager of the Latino Cultural Center, Benjamin Espino, and with Rosalinda Luna, also with the Latino Cultural Center. I wonder if they're on right now. I wonder if I've thrown people off since I'm logging in. Oh, there's Rosalinda. Hey, Rosalinda. I logged on through Cara Mía. I couldn't figure out how to get on directly. So I'm here to talk about what's going on with Cara Mía Theater right now. Also to talk about what live theater is looking at for the next 18 months. What does Latinx theater look like for the next 3, 6, 12, 18 months as well, or 24 months, 2 years? I'd love to talk about arts funding in Dallas, the survival of our arts organizations and arts institutions. So I'm here to talk about whatever people would like to discuss. Like everyone else, I'm communicating from my home. So I'm in my living room right now with a set piece from Blue by Vicky Grease. And it is the god Coyoxauhqui, the Aztec god Coyoxauhqui. And happy to be here. So Rosalinda, I know that you're on. Do you have any questions that you would like for me to jump on right away? Let me see if I'm able to see questions here. I can also go on my phone. Well, I'll just go ahead and get started talking about stuff. So clearly, our worlds as professional theater companies have been turned upside down. So here we are looking at preparing our next season, and we're looking at prospects for fundraising. We're looking at what plays we can do. And of course, when do audiences want to see our work? I think those are big questions right now. I'd love to hear what y'all have to say. I'm wondering how we can connect even further on this. I want to ask somebody out there, when do you think we're going to start producing theater again? Does anyone out there that works in live theater, does anyone out there have a comment on that? I was talking to another theater group, and they said that they're selling tickets for July. Does that seem realistic? And if so, what kind of show do you produce? So, quite frankly, the first question I'm asking is not when do audience get together, but when do actors start getting together? So if you want to produce in July, that means you rehearse in June. And will we be practicing safe distancing? So how do you rehearse a show if you need to be minimally 6 feet from each other? You may have seen that New York Times test in which there were people, the writers were saying that people actually could contract the virus through droplets within 6 feet or beyond 6 feet. So the question is, when do actors get together and start rehearsing? That's the big question. When do actors feel safe working together? And what happens? And And so what kind of agreement, are there agreements between actors when we're talking about rehearsing for a show? Do we need to get a list of places that people have been when we get together to rehearse? So we're essentially quarantining among an ensemble. Is that the best way to approach rehearsing if our theaters begin to open up and companies feel the need to produce? And what does that look like? Because the reality right now is that when you're in contact with someone, you're basically in contact with everyone else that they've been in contact with since you last saw them. So what does theater look like for an ensemble rehearsing? And so again, I encourage people to let me know. I mean, I want this to be a dialogue. When do we start rehearsing together? And a basic question too that we're all looking at is, when do we really start opening up? Dallas City Councilman David Blewett wrote an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News that was published online yesterday, and he says it's time to start opening up. And Councilman Blewett is over District 14, in which the Arts District and the Latino Cultural Center are in. So when would the Arts District and the LCC and other Dallas theaters open up? And so since there are no questions at this point, I'll just tell y'all what I'm looking at. I'm looking at these models, and I'm looking at how we're flattening the curve. And as we all know, flattening the curve basically means that we're elongating the curve. So instead of an abrupt, high and fast spike that would and that indicates a lot of infected people very quickly, and then drops drastically very quickly, now that we're flattening the curve, it's going to take longer for the same number of people to be infected, and longer for us to get to what we are calling herd immunity, in which 70 to 90% of our population would be infected. So people are looking at time frames that some are saying that maybe the plateau will start to decline of a flattened curve in August. Is one model that was in the Texas Tribune, which means that we could potentially be at 0 in January. I think that's a really good and optimistic scenario. I think there are other scenarios in which we're looking at 18 months. I think it'd be really valuable for people to listen to the daily, the New York Times podcast, which I think was 2 days ago, in which the New York Times reporter was talking about how and we clearly know that this isn't happening, but if all of the states were unified in a plan of loosening restrictions and tightening up and being very being very methodical about keeping the curve flat and gradually opening up our social spaces, our businesses, etc., so that not too many people are getting sick at the same time, so we don't overwhelm the hospital system. We would be looking at loosening up so that approximately 3 million people in our country would get infected and get sick. But if the numbers increase beyond that, we would tighten things up. So we're looking at this rubber band effect. So those are the questions that we're all asking. And so what opens up first? We hear people talking about opening up restaurants, having social distancing at restaurants, then having reduced hours, more intensive social distancing, and gradually filling out the dining room, and then longer hours. So I think if, in my opinion, if that was to start happening, we would start, ticking up in the number of infected people. So then when does theater come in? When do the performing arts come in? When do the arts come in, period? I'm eager to get back. I'm eager to go to museums and go to arts events. So when is that going to happen? Again, I'd love for people to ask questions, because right now I'm in a soliloquy mode. But I'd love to have a dialogue with people. So as the director of Cara Mía Theater, we're looking at two things. How do we financially make it over the next 16 months so we can get to day one of our fiscal year 2021-22? Financially, that is our objective. How do we make it from now until August 1st, 2021? And then how do we produce programming? And we're going to produce the programming with all of the resources we have. So that's our objective. And we're also going to take into account these dynamics of performance. When will the actors be able to convene? Turn on my comments. How do I do that? I just got a message. All right. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get to this. Discussion. See them. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get. No, that's not what I want. But turn this off. Discussion. Got you. All right. Got you. Okay. Yes. Okay. Virtual programming. Milt Ortiz, my friend and playwright from Borderlands Theater in Arizona. Thanks for joining in. I've gone out there to see 2 great shows, so thanks for coming on. Rosalinda from the LCC asks, how do we envision moving forward when we can with social distancing and things like seating and space outdoors? So this is what we've been looking at too, is, I wonder if, let me say this. I think we're going to have to look at other forms of performance for reference. So is there a world in which our next production, we have our actors at least 6 feet apart from each other? What does that mean? Immediately, it occurs to me that there is a we start talking about sound. So it may not be actors acting in close proximity, but at a distance. So does that mean that a performance can have an emphasis on language, storytelling, or singing and music, so that we're focusing primarily on our oral sensibilities and our vocal and musical capacities? So which moves into a form of a hybrid of radio and live performance that could also go into video, but could also be an audio performance mixed with live performance. Is there an opportunity where you have a storytelling chorus on microphones or not, and you have 1 performer, 2 performers, or more at a time performing at a distance, and possibly emphasizing movement? So we're looking at I think different forms. So when I think about this possibility, we're looking at sound, which approaches radio performance. So language, storytelling, sound effects, Foley, music. Foley, I mean kind of like those old school sound effects that you would see on radio shows, here on radio shows. But also it's used in film quite a bit, and we'll also do it in live performance. So kind of aspects of the radio performance. Then we're also looking at movement, dance, because if you can't get close to each other, what is the physical language of the actor? And in fact, it can allow the actor to focus even more on the possibilities of their expression physically. So, as Cara Mía, we focus a lot on physical movement, so that could definitely be an opportunity. So I think that that's one thing I've been thinking. Of course, performance outdoors, I think, is a possibility, or configurations within the theater or a black box or a large space could be a possibility. It's unfortunate that the code compliance regulations do not allow us to perform in the warehouses like we were doing many years back. Those would be great spaces right now. And I know that Artstillery is talking about drive-in theater, which I think is the right way to be thinking. So I think in general we're looking at breaking our ways of producing theater apart. Now, we may come back to this black box dynamic, but we are going to have to break apart what we do and be extremely creative and innovative with it. I mean, if you're like me, I'm already suspicious of utilizing projections in live performance because I often don't think they're necessary. So those are going to be the things that we're going to run into, is that some of the forms and devices that I think we limit ourselves from because they can often be unnecessary or superfluous, like projections or even sound design, can be overdone. Scenic design can also be overdone. I think we have to really figure out how to integrate these forms and devices into storytelling, so that whatever it is that we're integrating has to be essential to that. Now, that may be a little bit of insider talk and talking shop, but I think that's something that we're going to have to contend with, so that we're just not, pulling out every single bell and whistle. So that's what we'll be looking at. So we can have another comment. So how can you help Cara Mía weather the storm? Well, I think that staying connected with us is going to be key. I think what our first reaction right after the pandemic was announced was that, first of all, it was extremely stressful. That first week that the pandemic was announced, I felt like I was on my phone 72 straight hours, coordinating the shutdown of all of our programming, not just for the month of March and April, but for the entire next season. I mean, we were wrapping up our season planning and budgeting. So it was exhausting, and it was from morning until night. And then, of course, like trying to keep up with the news and watching CNN and what was happening in New York City seemed to dominate like the first 7 days after the pandemic. And so I told the staff, let's take the next few days off. And then we got together and we seemed to be meeting as a staff on the phone and conference calls, really kind of grieving and asking ourselves, why should we even have a staff meeting? Because it almost seemed to make no sense just to work for work's sake. So we began asking about what we needed, and we came down to a purpose. I think we need a purpose for getting up to do our job, and we need a reason, and we need pathways towards fulfillment. And so the purpose, the purpose, we refer to our mission, to uplift our communities, to engage and inspire people to uplift their communities. That became our cornerstone, and that became the center for our online programs, such as the Actors Tools for Calming the Mind, which is free tomorrow on our Facebook page at noon. Stephanie Tovar and Cheyenne Farley are presenting Stories That Heal, and Ernest McMillan will be presenting a workshop, A Light for Yourself and for Others, again, in looking at at our cultural traditions and how they provide pathways for inner strength during times of crisis. So this is what we're doing to connect and provide support for our communities. So stay in touch with us and communicate with us about what we're doing, and we're going to keep unrolling programs. And I think that's the essence. Communication, community. I think more than anything right now, we at Cara Mía and the people we have been creating community with, we want to keep building community. So that's in a way, that's what we've lost, but that's what we're rebuilding with forums like this. So that is the essence of what we do. The plays are our craft. It reflect our craft, and our classes and are also part of our engagement, but we're ultimately building a community for all of us so that we can find our own purposes and achieve fulfillment. We have a question from Rafael Tamayo. What do you see our current situation affecting the content of what theater becomes? I think that's a really good question. Clearly, we've been thinking about that, and right off the bat, we looked at some of the productions in our season for next year, and they didn't seem appropriate thematically anymore. I think we have to speak to the heart of this experience right now. I think we're dealing with so much in terms of ideas of freedom, of courage, dealing with fear. It seems that we could fall into experiencing different extremes of all of this. There's also bravado, and I would say an arrogance at this time, in which I think people say, I'm not really concerned about my own health or getting sick. And again, that's from my perspective, calling it, bravado. But that exists, and I think that's part of the makeup of what's happening. I mean, what is going to happen when we start rehearsing and opening up theaters? I mean, we're going to start seeing all kinds of attitudes towards being out in public and then sheltering in. Also, same with socializing. So I think we're going to need to address these. This interesting podcast of the Daily on the New York Times 2 days ago. They talked about how some people may intentionally become infected so they can develop immunity, so they can work. So it's an interesting dynamic, for people to have the confidence to go out in public. So that's going to be an interesting theme. And those that stay in, personally, I think that I think it's hard for any of us to know how our bodies will react, especially at this time. And since we don't really have any treatments, that's going to be challenging, which is also, could be part of this dramatic tension. I think we're going to be looking at healthcare, treatment, so many amazing and intriguing stories that are happening right now. The issues surrounding personal protective equipment, seeing heads of emergency rooms wearing goggles for eye protection, like skiing goggles for eye protection. The doctors saying that they're actually throwing out their concept of bedside manner because there's so many patients. They don't have the emotional reservoir to provide emotional support for other patients. So it's very cold and pragmatic. These are issues. I think we're going to definitely be looking at I think if we're looking at creating original work, which Cara Mía is, we're looking at healthcare. We're looking at healthcare workers. the dangers of healthcare workers. I saw Roman Polanski's The Pianist last night, and I was really struck by how you had a storyline, but a movie that also allowed us to take diversions into the extraordinary experiences that people were living through in Poland during World War II and at the time of the Holocaust. And it's amazing to see that movie at this time, because not only were we able to see these horrific and horrific moments, we're also able to see the extraordinary actions of individuals and the power of things like family, the difficulties of being apart from each other or separated from each other, and the power of art. That struck me so intensely watching The Pianist last night, because I think that one, I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't seen it, but we can see, towards what I think is the climax of the movie, we see the power of music, which I think again comes back to form. I think music, singing is going to be an opportunity for us, and so content, that's a huge question, but a good one, and I think that we have to look very close. We have to look very close to ourselves and look inside of ourselves to find out what that content is, because we're living it. So, and then the forms, I think we're going to have to break it apart, because I think the form of theater, just at least, for the next 3 to 6 months, I don't know how theater can be really what it was. So I think when we're looking at that, I hope that our arts patrons are understanding of that. I hope the arts funding community is seeing that with us. I want to say this. I do think that we're missing. We're communicating with each other a lot, maybe more than we even did before. And I'm talking about artists, especially organizations and funding agencies. We're communicating a lot, but I feel that there is a void regarding communicating on a broad scale. I almost wonder if it's time for us to reconvene, like we convened when we were creating the cultural plan, and you had so much input. Because I think we're not communicating on some of our most essential needs, or some people are communicating with others while others are left out. It's hard to say, but I think what we're missing right now is how does art exist at this time, and how do we support it and still let it flourish? How does it have purpose, and how do we allow it to flourish? In Mexico right now, the funding for the arts is just being decimated. And if we allow ourselves to do that, we could lose this power of art that I was speaking to, that the movie The Pianist speaks to, which is really uplifts us and transcends our daily experience. That's the whole point. That's the whole purpose. So where are our broad communications and platforms to talking about what does art mean? So these questions from Philip Morales, who asked about how do you support Cara Mía in this time? How does our city government support the arts right now in a way that's different than before the crisis? How does our federal government, which they're already unveiling some relief packages, the philanthropic community, which is privately which is made up of private organizations, privately run organizations. But how are we gathering together to create a vision for sustaining the arts? Because we have such a strong community, and we're going to have to keep it together. And as you can imagine, I'm concerned about our small groups, our culturally specific groups, our arts groups of color, that we typically struggle with funding and accessibility year in and year out anyway. And now that we're in a crisis, we don't want the dynamics of what happened to the SBA loans to happen with our arts groups. That the largest institutions who are also in great need and hurting right now are actually receiving the lion's share of relief, to the point that our smaller groups are not receiving enough support to survive and sustain ourselves. Because I think that we, as a community need to be very vigilant about the survival of our arts groups and our artists. So talking about our artists, we want these artists to continue working so they do not have to go into another field. So I think these are questions that we have to deal with, and unfortunately we haven't had these discussions on a large scale, and I think it's time to have them, and then I think we can begin thinking about how we sustain our arts ecosystem, because we do not want to decimate what we have built, because we've built something that has been uplifting people's lives. We just have to look at the number of arts groups and artists out there working. So I think we're wrapping up here. This is a fast 30 minutes, but I can take a couple of questions if anyone else wants to ask another question. So if there isn't anything out there, I just want to say thank you to the Latino Cultural Center for inviting me to be on this platform. And again, my name is David Lozano. I'm the Executive Artistic Director of Cara Mía Theater. Tomorrow on Cara Mía Theater's Facebook Live page, I will be leading a free online course called The Actor's Tools for Calming the Mind, which is based on techniques that I learned in a process that I've developed over the past 20 years. And it's a process that can help people become present, reduce stress, cultivate clarity of mind. And so it's a free class, and these are techniques that I use today. I use at this time, so that each morning I will go through this process in some form to become calm and to access my inner joy, so I can fall in love with what I'm doing, so I can be in love with what I'm doing and not operate from fear. Here's a question from Benjamin Espino, the general manager of the Latino Cultural Center. As Cara Mía is the largest Latinx theater company in Texas, do you think you will have more collaborations with Latinx theaters in Texas and or the Southwest? Absolutely. We as we go into this next season, we are definitely looking at our local and regional partners to work with. We're in this together, and just like all of us are walking the same journey, step by step. And to Raphael's question, what's the content? We're experiencing the same things: the fear of leaving the house, the fear of touching metallic surfaces, washing down our groceries. What does it mean to leave the house and open the dumpster? All of these things. I mean, and even beyond that, much more profound experiences. But we're all experiencing this, and even though we're apart, it seems like the gravity of the situation is pulling us together. And so I've been talking to Sara Cardona, the executive director of Teatro Dallas, even more regularly than I spoke with her before the pandemic. And we typically spoke once every week or 2 weeks. So we're in regular contact, and similarly with other people. So I think that we're looking at increasing our collaborations over these next 16 weeks, because we need each other. we're living through the same crisis, and we need each other's support, and there's a degree of collective learning. I think right now we're in a moment in time in which we really need to, how do I say this, kind of sand away, like with sandpaper, like wipe away the impulse to put ourselves first. I also think hierarchical structures here in our art world are also may not be the best structure for working in some of these times, because I think what's important is that we can cultivate a space of collective learning, because we're all experiencing and processing, and how we are processing this experience and what we are learning can help others so much. And this communication is the balm, as well as this communication can also become the platform for developing tools for getting through this. Again, this is about building community. So I think that this is a moment for us to gravitate towards each other, allow ourselves to listen more, so we can engage in collective learning. And this doesn't mean not being critical, because one thing I realized watching The Pianist last night is that we cannot be silent about injustice, oppression, and cruelty. And so this isn't the time to not be political. I understand that there's a time for us to shut that off so that we can have moments of self-care, because we don't want to invest in, junk news or aggression on social media. But it's important for us to be very clear-minded about what's happening, and for us to sustain our moral and ethical compass. And as nonprofit organizations, as artists, we have to be very mindful of our own values. So it's important for us to care for each other. It's important for us to engage in self-care. And it's definitely important for us to have a moral compass and a voice about what is right and what is wrong. So I think I'm going to need to wrap up now. But again, I want to thank everybody. Please join us on Cara Mía Theater's Facebook page for a free online course of the actor's tools for calming the mind, Thursday the 23rd at 12 noon, and then be on the lookout for other online programs. And we're also raising money for Cara Mía's Artist Relief Fund. Every dollar will go to pay artists who lost work from March into the summer. So please consider making a donation at caramiatheater.org. I want to thank the Latino Cultural Center's Benjamin Espino, the general manager, and the Latino Cultural Center's Rosalinda Luna for inviting me here. And I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all. And thank you for the questions. And thank you for the technical advice to Mariam, Matthew, and Rosalinda. Well, take care, and thanks so much. And please stay connected with Cara Mía Theater on social media. Have a great day. Bye-bye.